The Battle of Britain is like a cuddling toy. It is popular, everybody wants to touch it, and it's very fuzzy. Or as Professor Overy put it, most battles have a clear shape to them. They start on a particular day, they are fought on a geographically defined ground, they end at the recognizable moment, usually with the defeat of one protagonist or the other. None of these things can be said of the Battle of Britain. The geography of the Battle of Britain is wide and fuzzy, due to several reasons. First, the German attacks were flown against various targets like ships, industrial targets, and airfields. Second, the RAF also flew attack against German shipping, industry, and harbors. And third, it is often neglected that the Royal Navy and Kriegsmarine, Bomber and Coastal Command were also involved. After all, the Battle of Britain was seen by both sides as a prelude to the invasion of Great Britain. Let's take a look at the overall balance of force and the contemporary estimates. Both sides usually had wrong or completely wrong estimates on the other side's amount of operational planes throughout the whole battle. To do a proper estimation of force over a longer period of time, one needs three numbers: the initial strength, the number of losses, and the number of replacements. Now the British got the first, second, and third number wrong, whereas the Germans got the second and third number wrong. At first you might think, well, the Germans were less wrong. Well, no, because they were wrong in the wrong way. They underestimated the replacement output of the British, whereas the British overestimated the replacement output of the Germans. So let's take a look at the numbers. For the initial strength, the Luftwaffe got the estimate in mid-July 1940 quite right, because they estimated 675 operational British fighters, and in August 1940 the fighter command had around 700 operational planes. In contrast, the British estimated the frontline strength of the Luftwaffe at 5,800 aircraft in August 1940, whereas the frontline strength for the Luftwaffe in September was 3,000 planes with 2,000 operational, and only 1,700 aircraft used against Britain. Now in terms of production, the British assumed the German aircraft output was around 2,000 planes per month, whereas the Germans estimated that the British industry could produce 200 fighters per month. The real numbers were quite different. The Germans on average could only produce 1,000 planes per month, whereas the British produced a bit more than 400 fighters per month. So basically both sides got their production numbers wrong by a factor of at least 2 times, just in different directions. Now in terms of reported kills, both sides also got highly inflated kill numbers. But since the British overestimated all German numbers, this error actually corrected the estimates in the correct direction. Whereas the Germans' underestimation of the British production further increased the gap between reality and their air intelligence. As a result, the Germans assumed to fight a way smaller force than they actually did, which led to flawed strategic decisions because they switched to a new stage in a plan that was missing the prerequisite state. This faulty intelligence didn't change throughout the course of the battle, that is usually divided into 4 phases. The first phase of the battle was from June to mid-August 1940. It was used by both sides to learn and adapt. The Germans' operations were in a way armed recon. The amount of bomber aircraft was limited, whereas a large amount of fighters were used. During the day, the area of operation was mostly the British coastline, yet during night targets all over Britain were attacked. The British adapted their approach and only sent a small amount of fighters against the attacks, in case they were just a diversion. They improved their tactics, coordination and communications. The Germans learned that the bombers needed escorts since fighter command prioritized bombers, which meant they had to give up flexibility, one of the strongest advantages, since German fighter pilots were mostly trained and experienced in free-roaming hunting missions. The second phase began around mid-August 1940. Now the German attacks focused on destroying the British fighters and airfields. For about 4 weeks the Germans started around 50 main attacks against airfields. Additionally, there were around 1,000 small raids against other targets like industry, supplies and communications, whereas there were only 6 major raids against radar installations. The attacks on the airfields were of limited success. Some were not operational for several days or nights in total, whereas by the end of August, German air intelligence assumed that at least 8 airfields were completely knocked out and many others badly damaged. This was clearly not the case, since no airfield was permanently put out of action. Fighter command adapted to the strikes and used squadrons to protect important airfields, whereas others attacked the raids. Hurricanes were usually used against bombers, whereas Spitfires were used against enemy fighters. The British defense system described in my earlier video was probably never really understood by the Germans. They assumed the British were fighting a decentralized battle, where each airfield fought for its own. This was probably the reason why there was no systematic attack on the radar installations. Furthermore, the Germans overestimated the amount of damage they inflicted against fighters or installations. They assumed that in August, about 50% of the British fighters were destroyed. In early September, it was reported to Göring that the fighter command had only 100 operational fighters left. While the real numbers were a bit off if we define the difference of 600 fighters as a bit. Yet the heavy fighting took a toll on both sides. During the time period from August the 6th to September the 2nd, the fighter command lost 440 fighter planes. Whereas the Germans lost the same amount of fighters in the shorter period from 8th of August to the 31st of August. Additionally, lost another 460 aircraft. Yet in early September came the switch to attack primarily London, which removed pressure from fighter command. This change is usually seen as the beginning of the third phase. This move is usually regarded as a revenge attack ordered by Hitler for the bombing of Berlin. This assumption seems to be wrong. The decision to launch attacks on London rested with Hitler, but all the preparation was in place long before. Additionally, London was already bombed before the bombings on Berlin happened. The attacks on London were problematic for the Luftwaffe. The fighters were operating at the limits of their range. The losses from previous weeks of heavy fighting were extensive, and Göring ordered the fighters to fly not above the bombers anymore, but directly with them, which lessened their flexibility even more. Due to the high losses sustained, bombing attacks switched gradually to night bombings. For the London attacks, the Luftwaffe attacked from a higher altitude. This presented several problems for the RAF. First, radar was less accurate at this altitude, and second, their fighters usually couldn't get above the German planes, which would have been the ideal attack position. To adapt to this situation, fighters were given more time to assemble, and Spitfires were flying high altitude patrols. The losses for the Luftwaffe were high. In the first weeks, the Germans lost 200 bombers and 100 fighters, whereas fighter command lost 120 fighters. The losses continued to be high, and after about 10 days the Luftwaffe switched to nighttime attacks. Although the invasion of England was called off, the Battle of Britain wasn't over. The air attacks on Great Britain were continued, and around October 1940 it entered the fourth and final phase. This phase consisted mostly of night bombings and large daylight fighter operations. The night bombings could only be engaged by anti-aircraft fire, and thus the losses were minor. The daylight operations were performed with fighter bombers that were heavily escorted, thus the loss ratio of the fighter command was increasing, but it was too late and too little. Finally, in November, the daylight operations faded away and the Battle of Britain was over. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, share and subscribe. And see you next time.